You often hear the argument, grudgingly,
Yes.
from some scholars of that era that yes, Egypt was, partially black, or it was a multicultural society. They'll own up to the fact that there was some black folk there. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, when you talk about Egypt, though, you have to always talk about time. You just can't say, when you say that yes, Egypt was a mixture, it was a multicultural society. The question has to always be when. Yes, it is a multicultural society now. It is a multiracial society now. But when did it become? I mean, if you're talking to me about ancient Egypt, if you're talking to me about dynastic Egypt, you're talking to me about the period when Egypt was in its golden ages, and it had 4 golden ages before Europe had one. If you're talking to me about that, you're talking to me about black people. You're talking about a black society, black civilization. You're not talking about any mixed race. You're talking about black folk. And if you go back at the earliest time, the father of medicine, you go back to the beginning of writing, you go back to the beginning of astronomy, the beginning of philosophy, the very beginning of mathematics and geometry. You're talking about black people. You go back to the beginning of measurement, the beginning of the political state, the notion of bringing many different groups into one country, where you have the first nation in the world. You're talking about black people. You're not talking about anybody else. Okay. So when you start talking about mixtures or multicultural, yeah, you're talking about later periods of time. So the question has to always be, when are you talking about? By 2500 BC, Africans had already finished the pyramids. They were up. The Great Pyramids had been completed by 2,500 years before Jesus. That was black people. There's nobody else. There would be almost 3,000, more than 3,000 years before you even get Arabs in Egypt at that time.
So when you talk about the Greeks coming on the scene in 332 BC, again, in that particular case, all of the dynasties had already taken place.
Absolutely. Well, the major dynasties had taken place. The Ptolemaic dynasty becomes the last one, because that was the Greek dynasty, because they took over. But the major dynasties had already taken place. I mean, you had, for example, if you start talking about the great golden age, which we would normally call the greatest golden age, the period of the 18th and the 19th dynasty. This is the period of the Ahmose family, when you had Ahmose and you had Thutmose III, and when you had Hatshepsut, and you had Akhenaten, who had been Amenhotep IV. When you have Tutankhamun, this is the 18th dynasty. When you talk about that dynasty, you're talking about black people. That's all they were. There were no other people. They're not white people. They're not Asian. These are African blacks.
And I want to talk about some of those.
In the 19th century, you have 19th dynasty. You have Ramses, you see, and the whole Ramessid dynasty. And these are black people.